systems. So we're going to talk about Luxembourg's food systems resilience. I'm here because I'm the manager of a research project at the University of Luxembourg, where we accompany and observe and analyze Luxembourg's transitions to a more sustainable and resilient foodscape. And we do that mainly with qualitative research methods, where we talk to people and try and understand their constraints and their motivations. And today I'm going to talk about three big topics. One, food sovereignty and regionalizing supplies mainly, and another part on knowledge and what the system needs to be able to develop differently, and then partly a part on literacy and food democracy. We obviously are now very much confronted to this corona crisis, which engages all social, economic, cultural and political institutions of a society, and then all of a sudden puts them and their resilience to a stress test. And now, for the first time in a long time, for developed countries' inhabitants, we had a situation of momentary shortages in supermarkets, which created already a bit of fear or anxiety among customers. Of course, people in the developing world are largely used to all of that. It created tension, it created closure of food retail outlets, also for small producers such as markets, groceries, on farm shops, and then also an overload of online ordering facilities, and also spontaneous opening of new ones. So we see that the system is actually reacting relatively quickly. And this basically goes to show how artificial the sheer abundance is to which we are used in normality, and that is based on complex international logistic and very long supply chains that come at social, ecological, ethical prices to pay. We have long foot miles to extend seasonality and ship in food that isn't seasonal. We evict indigenous crops by mainly using large monocultures that are asked for on the global market. And we have a big concentration of intensive horticulture in Mediterranean countries, contributing to impoverishing soils and needing a lot of water, and building on the precarity of harvesters as well. So, in fact, all of this is put to a bit of a stress test now, because that's the question of what is going to happen if we have a long-term disruption or delay, or even disruption of those supply chains. So how food sovereign are we actually, or are countries actually, even in the developed world? And that's the first question I'd like to raise, because of the main question I'd like to raise, because food sovereignty is characterized by the largest possible diversity of produced foodstuffs, and also by the highest degree of autonomy, where this is possible, where local possibilities exist. However, the concept has to avoid nationalistic and protectionistic understandings of regionality. That's quite important, and it's quite a challenge actually in a small country like Luxembourg. Now, if we think about Luxembourg's self-sufficiency, we come obviously to the background that it's a grassland region, with half of its lands being meadows. Only Ireland is greener in the European Union, truly. And that's grass is obviously made edible by humans only via ruminants. So there is a large reason why we have so many livestock rearing agricultural farms, but still we we have seen in recent times that relatively small agricultural initiatives have shown that there is a lot of possibility of also vegetable growth possible on relatively small surfaces. However, they need manpower and water supply quite often. Now, Luxembourg's self-sufficiency in production, basically, we're really self-sufficient in beef, in milk, and also in various cereals. The cereal, they look very low on this graph because the so-called Hartweizen, so durum wheat, is imported in large quantities and is not at all produced in Luxembourg. So that brings the average down. But the soft wheats, barley, rye, and oats were self-sufficient as well in those. But you can see all the other things are quite low, and particularly the vegetables, and even more so the fruit. However, there are more and more community and private vegetable gardens. There's also civil society initiatives in the local food system, but we're going to talk about those more in the workshop, so I'm not going to go into detail here about those. In Luxembourg's transformation sector, the self-sufficiency is extremely low. The vast majority of goods are imported. I mean, there is an increasing number of small or also larger manufacturers producing a high variety even of transformed goods, but the quantity is insufficient. But as a small country, Luxembourg could actually lend itself to shorter supply chains and to more flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. But that only makes sense if the food supply was diverse enough and would also include more transformed produce that were also available in alternative independent outlets and not just in the large ones. There is, for instance, no legumerie in Luxembourg, but all of these things might be changing. There are challenges, of course, to this charming idea of food sovereignty, and one of them is quantities. So the first challenge is there may not be enough production. When one looks at small producers, they have fluctuations and they cannot easily guarantee constant and large supply for restaurants or canteens. That is one difficulty, and one possible pathways to counter that might be a cooperative food hub, which might be provisioned by many small producers, but functions as a one-stop shop for professional buyers. That is something that has been existing in other countries and is working well. And such associative and cooperative structures also gain influence if they combine it with marketing incentives too. The other challenge, as a contrast, is a scenario more than a reality, but it might be called too much production. So basically, if some larger players, larger agricultural exploitations or wholesalers or supermarkets would partner and invest into specific missing product lines and produce them in larger quantities, well, then the Luxembourg territory market is small. And there might be a limited profitability for that. And so here, a potential pathway might be trans-regional partnerships, for instance, in the greater region, but it could also be larger. And there is the Interact project Aroma, which recently did a quantitative study. Don't look at the figures. I'm going to share the PowerPoint afterwards. It's just to give you an idea. They did a quantitative aggregate calculation of the demand from the out-of-home catering sector and the productions. And we see basically that so they did it per country and they did it for the greater region. And we see that Luxembourg as a country lacks tomatoes, courgettes, beans, peas, cucumbers, strawberries, chicken and fish. So that's quite a lot of items that are used on a regular basis in out-of-home catering. But the greater region as a whole only lacks tomatoes, chicken and fish. So that there is a potential, obviously, to improve those, and all the other items are produced in surplus, and quite significant surplus even. Onions like 48 times the demand, for instance. So this goes to show that food sovereignty is mostly a logistical and political issue of supply chain management, market orientation, price policies, and various national legislative regulations, but much less so one of natural resources. And we're often made believe that we live in a place where there is not more to do. And so, in fact, this relativizes that. Another challenge is manpower. Diversified agroecological systems, as I said, we needed more diversification for various products, and not just the ones that were kind of high on. They just simply need a high labor input, and the available manpower in the sector is insufficient. Farmers working on main businesses on average work 60 hours a week, so they cannot easily take on more diversification tasks. So pathway here is find new workforce, including neo-peasantry and lateral entrance into the farming profession. Another challenge to encompassing food sovereignty is knowledge for quality. The challenge basically is that diversified agroecological farming systems that are ecologically regenerative, socially just, economically viable, it's quite a high expectation, and they need high knowledge input to produce foodstuffs with added ecological, ethical, and qualitative value. And here a potential pathway is to enhance knowledge diffusion between farmers and between newcomers, but also between farmers and researchers to have virtual loops. Another challenge to food sovereignty is financial profitability. There are economic risks for conversions and diversification for farmers. We know that now, even ones involved in programs like Naturgenezen or similar have problems because their clientele has broken away to some degree. And here pathways are to create market incentives and political guarantees for farmers who actually are inventive and would like to downsize on the exponential areas in favor of new niche products. And for that, we would need a coherent national food policy that spans more than agriculture, in fact, but is coherent among various areas and ministries. Another challenge that's related to that is not at national level, but at EU level. And here the problem is that benefits that diversified farming brings to society, they are barely rewarded by current subsidies and support measures under the Common Agricultural Policy. And so a potential pathway here might be that we would need a multi-level governance, and that the EU should find ways to encourage local food initiatives, and it could be complemented to bureaucratic supranational regulations, but also via local institutions that they trust, funding opportunity, and so on. So basically, there is a need for a common food policy and not just simply a common agricultural policy. Another issue is consumer education, and especially governance measures, because there is insufficient Ökoroutine is the German word I quite like, which basically means that the ecological choice is a default choice. We don't have the possibility to choose between extremely cheap chicken that has been in those mini boxes and is important and imported from very far, etc. We just have qualitative produce from farms that do qualitative work. And so for that to happen, one would need, I mean, for the consumers already to think about those things, we should embed a responsible food literacy in mandatory education for sustainable development programs at all ages. I mean, small children, but also up to university level. And another pathway for the eco-routine, which might be less on the private level, but more on the canteen level, where people, a large amount of people actually eat outside of confinement at their lunch, is that the state would incentivize the production, distribution, and consumption of sustainable products via labeling schemes that certify various types of quality. That would, on one hand, bring about a well-informed and self-motivated population, because the more people are used to these products, the more they see that it's interesting, it's worth it. And also on the public tender side, so les marchés publics, there would be an obligation and not just a recommendation to buy produce that are labeled as having ecological, ethical, qualitative surplus. One tool that is able to combine those elements are food policy councils. They build, in a participative way, optimal conditions for a deliberate shift towards this multi-level governance and sustainable food systems. Luxembourg is actually at the moment we are creating a National Food Policy Council. That is a premiere worldwide. Normally, food policy councils are more urban policy tools. And Luxembourg has a chance here to create, because of its small size, of course, because the National Food Policy Council in Luxembourg would be the same size than one of larger cities, obviously worldwide. But because of this small size and the national level of the Food Policy Council, Luxembourg can actually become an example of such an instrument at national level, which is a good tool for this food policy at national and then hopefully EU level. So the food policy councils intervene in the domains of food policy, food sovereignty, food democracy. Citizens can participate in those food policy councils, and generally they bring about an independent cooperation among equal partners of all the areas in the food system. And in Luxembourg, that will be policy and administration, research and civil society, as well as production, transformation, gastronomy, and trade. These are spheres that usually don't talk to each other so much. They talk about each other. They don't often talk to each other, and they don't often cooperate either. And so that is the idea that projects can be set up. There can also be a guideline or a strategy, common food program. All of these are steps for a national food policy, and that's striving to shape Luxembourg's food system in a more sustainable way according to regional, fair, and ecological criteria. This is a type of platform, and it permits social movements, entrepreneurs, civil society, administrative people to bloom and experiment creatively with innovations and then communicate them publicly. So to summarize, a sustainable, resilient, resourceful food system is socially just, ecologically regenerative, economically viable. It should engage a wide range of people across the food system. That's quite an important thing, that people, also citizens at their level, that people at various levels feel concerned about the food system, and they don't just get this fatalistic view of saying, oh, I can't do anything anyway, and this agribusiness is just beyond me. So the idea is that people are empowered at all the levels that they are. I mean, somebody directing a company can be empowered just as much as a simple citizen to contribute to this. Such a resilient food system would provide food security for all of its population, not just the wealthy fringes, with high quality, ethical, fair foodstuffs. In a larger regional context, so not just a tiny national or nationalistic view. Obviously, that is not such a simple, straightforward thing to do. I mean, there are different fiscal regimes, different legislations, and so on. It's a challenge, definitely, but it's something worth striving at. It would also shorten supply chains in a regionalized cooperative way to hopefully make all the actors profit and not just make some bloom and others suffer very much. And it's based on local diversification and innovation. So it involves a lot of learning processes. So potential pathways include diversified agroecological farming, corporate food hubs for the small producers. That's quite an essential thing. Maybe it's easier to set that up nationally before envisaging something trans-regional, but that is really something that small producers would wish for. Another pathways are initiatives for direct marketing among producers and individual consumers, so the community-supported agriculture, Solavis in German. And then political decisions to make sustainable choices mandatory for public tenders. That's where the official label schemes come in. So national food policies would need to be built, and ideally also a common food policy at EU level could incentivize alternative and civic networks based on multi-level governance. And food policy councils, as I said, can both help get that process rolling and accelerating, but also monitor it and see how things are evolving and have a comparative dialogue among the countries. So that's what I was going to present today. And I wanted to end the presentation with a question for you. Call for discussion. So what could be further ideas for a local food system resilience, and what initiatives can you think of to make Luxembourg's food system more resilient? So thank you very much for your attention.